I have so much to talk about in this BG. We're going to talk about pushing and collapsing. We're going to talk about team fights. We're going to talk about positioning when you're carrying an orb, a little bit about mechanics, and a few other things. So let's jump right in. While this BG may be only around the high 1800s MMR and pretty low CR, this team and this particular game demonstrate some key concepts that are fundamental to the Temple of Kotmogu orbs map, and as well most other team fights, because really that's what this game is. That's what this map is a continuous team fight, and positioning is key, and there's so much that's going on. Most of my other videos that I've done, and I have done a few, I'll link those in the cards, talk about communication and being able to coordinate your efforts to pick up orbs in time, to focus on the same targets, to call things out. And that's why largely this map is considered the YOLO killer, because a lot of YOLOs are not used to talking to each other. At the beginning of this game, the opening strat is to have myself pick up one orb where Boom can pick up the other, and we are going to go straight into their team fight. The thing about Temple of Kotmogu that a lot of people for some reason somewhat forget is that there's always a team fight. Every Temple of Kotmogu, regardless of your strat, whether you pick up 2 orbs, whether you ignore 2 orbs, whether you pick up 1, it eventually ends up in a clash between the 2 teams fighting somewhere. As a quick review, holding orbs in the mid gets you a bunch of points. Holding orbs on the outside of middle gets you a chunk of points that's not as much, and you can still hold an orb even out by the graveyard and still get some points. But the thing that a lot of people forget is also you get points for kills. And it can be hard to win off of that entirely, but you'll see at the beginning of this game, it keeps us tied over in terms of points, and even a little ahead for a long time without us actually having to push all the way to the back to get their orbs. As I pick up this first orb, the first thing I want to point out to you is actually on the reporter minimap. Notice the cluster of dots and how we quickly bring up the tail end of our group to the main team fight. This is something that a lot of teams struggle with, is getting their orbs and getting the healers and basically the front, mid, and back lines organized. Right off the bat, we get a quick kill on one of their DPS that does not do as well at staying with their group, and they get separated. We almost get a kill on this holy priest as well, but he manages to get gripped back into his group. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is a team fight stratagem called push and collapse. I've also heard it called extend and collapse, but a lot of people talk about pushing, and that makes sense to people. You saw at the beginning here, we pushed up onto that warlock and tried to get a kill, but eventually that DK came back into our back lines and we immediately collapsed back on the DK. The idea there is to push up so that their back lines and their healers back up a little bit, and then turn around on the audacious front linesman that pushes up into our back lines. By then, he's either ranged or LOS'd from his healers, especially with these planters. We use these planters as a portion where we can of our front lines to LOS their DPS. Notice also my positioning. The Boomkin's playing up a little bit ballsy up front, but for the most part, we're using those planters to try and keep a distance away. This is something that a lot of orb carriers forget, is that though you take increased damage and though you take reduced healing, you're also doing more damage, and that's why we like to have our ranged pick up those orbs, because they can sit in the back, and even if you're only getting a few dots out, you're doing increased damage and you're contributing to the team fight quite well, versus if you have to push up, then you're putting yourself at risk. You saw again right there, we just collapsed on that DK again. He ranged his healers. That was right after a push up on that hunter, right where we didn't get the kill, but immediately as soon as that DK pops up in the back, the target caller calls out collapse or get back on the demon on the DK, and everybody just basically turns around and wipes him. I say everybody, but in general, it's not always going to be everyone. Not everyone in the front line has the mobility to be able to pull or peel like that. Usually it's the range, and so this kind of mechanic tends to lend itself well to groups that have a balance of melee and range. You just saw in the back there, again, we have another extender, this Demon Hunter on our boomkin, and he manages, because of his mobility, to peel out. If we had called that collapse a little bit earlier, we probably would have been able to lock him down. The DK eventually tries in again, and again we get the kill on the DK, but he also, because we've been holding these orbs for a long time, manages to get the kills on both of us. Now, I want to point something out. Look at the score right now. We killed one of their orb carriers, they killed two of ours. But for the longest time, throughout this team fight, we haven't been pushing all the way up to try and get kills on their orbs. We haven't been taking the bait. They have. And so because we've gotten so many kills, we've gotten extra points from that. And that puts us up about 100 points by the time that the first orbs begin to drop. At this moment, the team is kind of regrouping, so is theirs. Theirs has been on more or less a split res for most of the game because of our ability to get kills. Each team gets one orb and then a second orb, but then we got to group up. What we find is that they immediately take mid, and this is something you see in regular BGs all the time. Get two orbs and take mid and just stay there. Well, in mid, you're really just walking around with a giant target on your back. So we immediately call out that we're going to get green. I just rezzed. I go stand next to green, and I'm able to pick it up and bring it to mid. We group up our orbs. We've already gotten, again, a split res on their team by getting a couple of kills, and again, we have the advantage. Now, at this point, we're kind of stuck in mid, and the idea is, what do we do? You know, do we hold this, or do we go out and play what's called Ring Around the Rosie, or basically running around from corner to corner, getting those sort of midfield points with the orbs? At this point, we decided to hold mid for a while. We have some trouble getting kills here because it has sort of scattered our push and collapse strategy here. Being just in a general mid fight, everybody's positioning is kind of off. So I eventually get killed again. So does a few other people. Some of them die as well. But now you see that we're actually down by an orb. We have one, and they have three because we took mid. And when you take mid, unless you've got a couple of range sitting outside waiting for orbs to drop, then you end up being the slower team to get to those orbs. So we have a bit of comeback to make. By the time I've rezzed, we've managed to kill another orb and pick another one up. Here I am coming into the reformation of our team again. We've managed to group up. We do have one person out kind of in the middle of nowhere. Well, he's coming back from green, getting back into our tight cluster here. We're getting a kill on this extender, and we're essentially collapsing into him. I didn't see a push before that, but I just rezzed. Here we're going to push up onto the lock, who's pushed into us quite a bit, and eventually we might swap back onto the DK. Instead, I think the lock actually manages to die due to dots and whatnot before he gets away from us. Here we're pushing up onto the priest. We've already gotten several kills. We're pushing. We're waiting for that extender, waiting for that ballsy DPS to push back into us, and line of sight his healers around a planter or something. In this case, that doesn't actually happen. The DPS kind of stayed back, so we decide to push on orbs. One thing that we are also watching is our map. You notice that we picked up a third orb. We lost one in this push, which wasn't all that great, but we've also been waiting for this orange orb with the boomkin to get back to our group. When we lose one, I managed to go and get the green orb, which was kind of a ballsy move on myself. I end up having to disperse and pop all kinds of cooldowns to get out of here because the DK keeps gripping me back. The VTs from their Shadow Priest are getting out of hand as well, but we do manage to get the orb out of there and regroup back in purple corner. From here, we're able to line up defensively with our front lines and get a few more collapse kills. You just saw that full moon wipe out the Warlock. if you've been watching the reporter minimap, you also noticed that our DK and Demon Hunter rezzed on the far side of the map and managed to lock up the purple orb carrier, and that's where that just appeared. We were ready for it because they saw it come, or they knew it was coming. Our DK in this case is calling the strat and the targets when he's here. In his absence, myself and another S-Priest, Mark, in the character listings, are calling out targets, kind of talking over each other, but we're calling the same targets because it's, again, always the overextender or the one who has LOS'd his heals. It's not this, oh, we got to get on the healer or we got to get on the orb carrier or something predetermined by that. It's much more about positioning and whether or not they're going to get the heals. The other thing that the S-Priest and I are both doing, we're both S-Priests, is we're calling out our Siphons, because essentially that is a huge hindrance to whatever target we're on. Siphon knocks down the target's movement speed and their incoming heals by 50%. So we don't just spam that out too much, but whenever we feel like, okay, this target's gonna go down, we will throw it on there, call it out, and that tells the other DPS that they do not need to burst a major offensive cooldown to get the kill. They just need to basically go and hit it with their normal stuff, and if it's, you know, half health to begin with, it is a pretty confident kill. In this case, we pushed up a little bit too much. We're a bit spread out. You can kind of see us all the way between green and purple, and so they managed to get about a half wipe on us and 3 orbs. Not too bad because we still managed to get a single orb, and we are in the lead, but at this point we pretty much need to reset. By the time I do res, I noticed that a lot of their orb carriers are kind of grouping up into the blue corner. So I try and orient myself to be able to get a couple kills real quick on them. I call that out in Discord so that my team knows who I'm going to be on. So you notice we're already in the purple corner, and this half-health hunter comes walking by and takes a few dots and dies real quickly. I also noticed this warrior who has been, for most of the game, kind of hiding, and sometimes this works. I see it in regular BGs, but you know, once you get enough stacks, it's trivial for even an S-Priest who just rezzed to come and basically look at you and you die. So I managed to get an orb myself. At this point, the tricky part is getting our orbs to safety. This boomkin is getting sat on by the demon hunter, and a couple of other people in Discord are actually calling out that we need to peel over this boomkin because he is having a hard time. But what this does is that once he does get away with a nice mind bomb CC on the two of them, we are able to nuke down these two guys in, again, another collapse maneuver. We're able to regroup. Now they're down 2 of their frontline melee, and we're back into our momentum of pushing, collapsing, pushing, collapsing. Having cleared out our back lines, the Boomkin and I are also able to LOS around certain different things. You see the Boomkin hiding behind the corner. I'm a little bit out in the open, but largely that's as bait. I just picked up the orb, and we're bringing in this warrior who's basically going to die real quick here to another full moon. Our whole team is really single targeting really well on all these extenders that push into our back lines. Looking at the score right about now, you'll notice that we're only about 100 points away from victory. We've managed to actually not just raffle stomp them for the entire game. I just want to point out that for the most part, that there were very few times where we had 3 or 4 orbs. A lot of the time it was 2 orbs and just getting tons of kills. This is a game of momentum. If you can get the other team on a split res and still manage to hold your orbs in some sort of semi-useful way, that's the key to success here. The last thing I want to say is that if you're watching this and thinking push and collapse is a pretty good idea, that's not something you can do on your own. So share this video with your team and work together. Like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you next time with another video.
My first time playing a hunter, I got so excited. I was like, I get to be a base defender and knock stuff back and trap shit. I thought it was so cool. Laney was in this BG. I fucking like rolled up to my base. I put my flare down. I put my little trap to the right, my little trap to the left. I fucking like pulled my pants up. This is a big boy base defender. And then I stared at the flag that I didn't cap for like 5 minutes.